Well, thank you all for having me here. It's an honor to be here. And thanks to Scott and his crew for getting me up first, because coming after Mr. Cook and Mr. Moretti's pretty big shoes to follow, so thank you for that. And as I go through my presentation today, I like to keep it kind of dynamic. I'm not going to stop on all the slides and look at all the writing. You can get a copy of this later, so you can read through it as much as you want. Also, if you have any questions afterwards, you feel free to just contact me. You can text me. I'm always answering questions every day for people around the world. I'm more than happy to do it. So instead of trying to necessarily get all the details down, I want you to understand sort of the big picture of what I'm trying to get across to you. And the first thing is I want to get the message out there that there is not one way to do things. We're all built differently. We all have unique things that we do in our golf swing. If you look at all the greatest players in the Hall of Fame, they all have idiosyncrasies in their golf swing. So trying to make us all look the same way and do the same things, it just doesn't work. And I think that message is getting out there stronger and stronger. And I just want to support that today and present maybe some concepts that you haven't heard yet. The next goal is going to be to give you some information that you can take away. So when I talked to Scott about coming out and doing the presentation, he said that he would like the members to be able to go away, have some information that they could use on the lesson tee tomorrow. And so hopefully I'm going to accomplish some of that goal today. Last thing being, you only need to take one or two things away from this. You don't have to take it all away. There may be one or two things that resonate with you, and if I've got that across to you and you're able to take one or two things away and work with it, then we've done a great job. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to address three different areas today, two of them in biomechanics and one in the inner game. And so in biomechanics, what we generally look for is there's structural influences, there's dynamic influences, and then there's functional influences. So the structural influences have to do with your body, your anatomy. They're built into you. You can have a hip replacement, you can have a shoulder replacement, a knee replacement. These things just don't change. I've been actually screening for these influences for over 30 years, and I've never seen it change in a golfer. Now with conditioning, we can see it move a little bit because everything biomechanically kind of comes in a continuum across a range, but it won't completely move, to the other side of a range. Dynamically, we look at patterns that you've developed athletically through your life. So when you're going through growth spurts when you're younger, there's two of them, and you're playing different sports and you're doing different athletic activities, you develop these dynamic patterns. They are really, really hard to change. And a lot of times we're sort of encouraged to change them because there's some theory that's supposed to be better out there. The reality is that if you can identify the pattern and use the pattern, the player can get to their best efficient pattern and something that they can maintain more consistently a lot faster. So we look at these dynamic patterns and try to use them instead of change them. I'm not going to address functionality because there's a lot of TPI out there and a lot of other systems that address functionality. Those are really more sort of the conditioning of the machine. How well conditioned is the machine? Checking your ranges of motion and stuff like that. I do encourage you, if you're not working with functionality, to study TPI or some other system. Find an athletic trainer expert around that you can team up with, with your students so that you can deal with those functional issues when they arise. All right, so I'm gonna skip over some of this overview information and kind of get to the key information here since we have only a short period of time today. Oops. So when we look at the structural influences, there's 12 different ones that I look at, and I'm only going to talk about 3 of them today. In all, there's 35 influences that I screen for when I'm working with my students. And 12 of them are in the structural area. The rest of them are dynamic patterns. So you can see there's a lot of dynamics that we get into. So the first one I'm going to talk about is what I call swing anchor. You may have heard of posting before. And what that has to do with is which leg your body favors when you're pivoting. And there's one major influence that determines which leg you're going to pivot around. And that's actually your distribution of mass in your body. So if you have more mass on the left side of your body wants to favor your front leg when you're pivoting. If it has more mass on the trail side, it wants to favor that trail side. And this is not like, everything's not perfect. Like, I don't know if you ever heard the story, but there's a biomechanist named Scott Lynn, and he was talking to Paul Wood, who's a scientist for peeing. And Paul said to Scott one day, he says, Scott, He says, you work with humans. He says, I don't like humans. Humans are messy. Golf clubs are clean. And so we're messy. We have a lot of these patterns that sort of float around, and they're not like perfect and ideal. So sometimes when you're coaching and you know that a student's built to do something, but it doesn't look like the sort of the textbook pattern, it doesn't mean you have to try something else. You have to figure out, well, how is it floating, or why is it moving around a little bit? And so, so don't look for like these perfect patterns all the time, as we're going through this. Another one of the patterns is our delivery plane, and so there's, the slot that we talk about that we get into the golf swing. Some people deliver it more shallow, some people are steeper. Why is that? And we're all supposed to shallow it out so much these days, but John Senden, one of the best ball strikers in the world for a long time, brought it down on a shoulder plane, and John Daly came down on a shoulder plane. So we don't necessarily all have to shallow it out that much. And the last one I'm going to talk about is linkage, what I call swing linkage, and it's linkage for impact. And the reason why I'm picking these three is these three actually sort of set up the form of your golf swing. If you understand what these look like in the player, you'll have a good understanding of why the player's swing looks the way it does. And I think it's important for us to understand that. And so when we look at the pivot, there's a lower body pivot influence and there's an upper body pivot influence. And they can actually be separate from each other. So there's what I call the axis of rotation for those. And I'll get to the pictures because it's more exciting to see the pictures here. So you can see there's three basic places that you can pivot around: your right hip joint, your left hip joint, or the center. And again, there's a continuum there. How far left to right are you? You'll have some players that are 80-20 over here, and you got Troy Madison, 80-20 over here. You've got more centered people, and there's ranges in between. So we want to actually be able to screen for that and figure out what works best. So this was from the very first book I wrote on this information, just kind of showing some sequences of what front looks like. In 1991, I was playing in the Queen Mary Open, and Mac O'Grady watched me on the range for 2 days. We ended up playing back-to-back groups. After the second round, he ran out to the parking lot and stopped me and said, "I want to talk to you." And I explained these theories to him at the time about why our bodies balance this way and how our alignments go. Well, he incorporated it into his coaching and did a bunch of their own research on it. Mike and Andy came out of that camp. There's where front anchor, stack, and tilt came from. He actually had a center anchor Sneed model at the time. And in our conversation, I actually said to him, and Mac, a lot of people are taught to load the right side and play off the right side, because he had a coach named Joe Norwood, which was one of his original coaches, and he was a right side load guy. So they all existed, and Mac actually taught 3 different models for quite a while. And it's not like we invent this stuff. We just notice that this is happening out there in the world. But certainly, I think you can imagine players doing all of these, that play out there. One of our basic tests for this is this post test. And again, we're messy, and this is not a perfect test. The most perfect way of testing what leg you should favor is get a DEXA scan done, because a DEXA scan will actually tell you how much mass you have left to right in your body, and that'll give you a good indication of which leg you should be rotating around. This can be cheated, and a lot of people do cheat this, but if you just take a club and you put it lightly on your legs, you don't want to push too hard, because as you pivot, if you are pushing as you pivot, do you see how that would make me go front? So I don't want to do that. I just want to sort of rest it there. And in my case, just don't even think about golf. I just want to turn. So when I turned, do you notice how my hips are a little bit front of center and my chest is a little rear of center? That's just the way that I do it. And so we want to identify sort of these upper and lower patterns. Basically, when we're doing the basic post test, we're looking at the lower body. And so here's a couple of students doing it. You can see they did it very differently. And then when we look at the upper body, we're actually looking at what I call the axis of symmetry. So as your thoracic cage is turning, your spine actually torques. And for some people, when they actually turn the thoracic cage, it'll torque rearward. It'll actually make the center of that hub translate rearward. Others, when it torques, that center of that hub will translate this way. And then some will be in the middle. And I've talked to a lot of doctors and orthopedic surgeons about this over the years. And I've actually grabbed different skeletons in doctors' offices and turned them to see what happened. And even the doctors are like, yeah, they don't all torque the same. They recognize that this does not, we're not all built the same way, and it doesn't all work the same. So that's why you'll see a lot of, like if you look at Troy Madison, he looks like he's over here. You know, uppers front and lowers front. But you got people that look like they both go rear. And then you have players that look very dramatic, like Nick Watney used to be that way. When he swung very naturally. So we're looking at that upper axis as well and what's going on with that upper axis. So this is the basic screen that I do for this, and I like this one the most. And again, we are messy, so we can cheat. And the way that people cheat is that they're thinking about the golf swing. They're not just thinking about just turn. So I call it the propeller screen. If you stand up, you hold your arms up, and from here you just think, okay, I'm just going to feel what turns like a centered manner to me. And I go ahead and I turn. So can you see how once again my hips went more that way and my chest went this way again? And that's just the way I turn. Some people are centered and centered. Some people are front and front. Some people are rear and rear. This is a really good screen for doing that because people don't tend to cheat this one very much. There's Steve Lowry. When I tested him, you can see he's very centered, maybe a hair left of center, but very centered. So Jennifer Johnson played on the LPGA. You can see that she's actually very rear, She's on her rear leg, and her upper hub translated rearward as well. Interestingly enough, if you look at Steve when he does it, he's very horizontal. And then you got Jennifer, she looks very diagonal. The angle that they turned at, the propeller planes are going at different angles, aren't they? So we're going to address this later on. There's a dynamic pattern I call your diagonals versus your horizontals. And this one's really, really extremely important. It's overlooked by most teachers right now, and I'll explain later why it's important that we need to do that. But once you understand all this information, you're going to see, like when you do a basic screen like this, there's tells in every screen. So as I'm watching the students go through their screens, I'm learning about other aspects of them because there's tells inside the screens that we have. So this is a really good player in Northern California, and you can see he's a lot like Troy Madison. He's front and front and very horizontal. This is Mike Small. Mike Small plays best when he does this. He's got a lot of habits that take him away from this, but you can see his lower body wants to go slightly forward and his upper body wants to go rear, and you can see he had more tilt in his turn than the previous gentleman. And there's a neutral. We like Adam Scott's swing. Why does everybody like Adam Scott's swing? He's Mr. Neutral. Nothing looks too extreme. He's not wave side bending, right? And he's not adding a lot of crazy moves into the swing. So everybody likes that. But this is something that you have to accept. If you're built to have this sort of pattern, you got to work it into your golf swing if you want to play your best golf. So there's a drill that I do once they've got the feel of that propeller screen, they're doing it correctly. And you can hold the club in either hand. It doesn't really matter which one you do. But you just get into your address posture. You do your propeller screen. And then earlier I actually sort of did it this way just to show the propeller screen. I'm actually built to tilt a little bit. So when I go level, I actually feel my body bind up. So you just go ahead and tilt, drop it down, put it in your hands, go up to the top, and you just go ahead and you swing. And I haven't practiced that at home for a while, and then they can actually go right out onto the golf course, tee up some balls. Usually they're more comfortable teeing them up first, and play golf shots with the actual drill. Here's Mike Small doing it. We were in Orlando, I think, at the time. But again, you can see, pretty good looking golf swing when he actually does it that way. All right. So one of the other ways we can screen for your swing anchor is playing shots. I'm just going to buzz through these. If you want to study it more, I've got books written on this as well. You can reach out to me. I've got a ton of videos on this in an app that I have, and I give a deal out to the PGA professionals as well. So if you want to study more, you can study more. But just by playing shots off one foot, another foot, varying your stance widths, what ends up happening is your head actually starts to counterbalance the action better when you're in the stance that fits you, and it helps identify exactly where you need to be. Then what I actually have students do is once they identify which one of those stances matches them, I have them warm up. Whenever they go out to the driving range, they warm up with that stance. So I'm left of center, so I pull my right foot back till the toes are about the ball. I widen my stance a little bit. I put a little bit more pressure on my left foot, and I warm up playing shots that way. And it helps with your mind and your neurology, understanding like, ooh, I'm built to be balanced this way. This works for me. So you can see here some front models, and you can see they do look a little bit different. So you got David Duvall there, play his best golf front. I actually talked to him about this. And he's not a stack and tilt type front guy, because he actually would feel like he was rotating into the ball more from behind the ball instead of on top of the ball. And I said that to him, and he goes, that's exactly right. I always rotated into it from behind the ball. So there's lots of front anchor models. Like stack and tilt isn't the only front anchor system out there. Troy Madison, you can see he's very front and front on the right-hand side there, and that's Charlie Wee in the middle. I actually screened Charlie Wee in Hawaii. I coached Dean Wilson for about 3.5 years, and they were friends. He had Charlie come on out. Charlie was just out of Berkeley at the time. He was doing the whole load the right side, you got to get to the right side. I took sequences of them, pictures. I actually wrote notes on there and said, look, you're built to be front. And this is totally away from what you need to do. Needless to say, a few years later, he's doing stack and tilt, which is a really good model for him. As a matter of fact, I'd say he's probably the closest to their model swing, which was a good thing for Charlie. Hogan was front. When Mac and I were talking, I actually said, if you look at Hogan's swing, he bumps, transitions forward. He really stabilizes into that lead side, and he rotates around that lead side. He's a front anchor golfer. Bernard Langer, front anchor golfer. Very horizontal if you look at Bernard also. And then you got Lotheball there, front anchor golfer. So here's rear. Keegan, very much so rear. You can see everything's on the rear side of that vertical line. Dustin Johnson, rear, but a little less rear. Mo Martin, again, very rear. And by the way, if you have any questions, go ahead and fire away at me. I don't mind taking questions as I go through this too. Sometimes it's a little more dynamic to do it that way. Tom Kite, for example, very rear. He started out most of his career front. If you look at old videos of him, he kind of hung towards the front side like a lot of players did. And they called him Mr. Second. He made these switches. This is 92, because this is when he won the U.S. Open, so it was shortly before that. I don't know if Mr. Cook knows when he made those changes, but he went rear, and he ended up winning the U.S. Open. It worked really well for him. Corey Webb and Rich Beam there. You can see very rear type of patterns. I put these triangles on. These are very old pictures. That's my way of looking at the anchor back then. You can see the way the triangle leans kind of gives you a really good idea of what their swing anchor is. Centered models, this was Ernie swinging very centered, Phil, and Tom Watson. We got Ty Tryon, who probably was the most centered at the time. On the left there, you got Sergio and Kelly Robbins, very, very centered looking pivots. So this is the mixed version. What are the different types of mixed versions that you can see? And you can see that's Laura Diaz on the left there. Her hips are trying to be stable and hold left, and her upper body went rearward. You can see Nick Faldo was very similar like what Mike Small picture looked like. And Natalie Gobos, this one confuses people a lot, but it exists out there, and we do see it. The upper hub tries to stay more centered. The lower body goes more rear. And so people always think this is a bad move, but there's a lot of really good players that use that pattern as well. So if I saw a student doing that, I wouldn't immediately try to change it. I'd screen them first to see, are they actually built to do that? So what happens when you get mismatches? And David Duvall had a lot of other things going on in his life. It wasn't all about his golf swing, but we did talk about this when I talked to him. And when he was front anchor, he was #1 in the world. And for whatever reasons, he was convinced to change his swing. And in the one picture there, he's centered, but in reality what he did is he actually went rear, he re-centered into a center alignment, and then he tried to get instinctively back forward. And his ball striking was the worst of his career at that time, because there was just too much movement going on, and it was really hard to manage. And it was so far away from what he learned to play his best golf. Mike Weir, his best stats were when he was rear anchor. And so highest world ranking, most wins, won a major, the highest money list, everything, driving distance, they were within I think 1.5 yards of each other between stack and tilt and when he was rear. And for whatever reason, he changed for that. Interestingly enough, he tells a story about how he wrote to Jack Nicklaus for some advice, and early on Nicklaus said, stick with what got you there, stick with what makes you good. But he did make those changes. Now, he dropped way down, and then when he went to stack and tilt, he came back up from that, but he never got back to the same level he was at when he was actually swinging rear anchor. Tom Kite, exactly the same thing. He was actually hanging front anchor for a long time, switched to rear again. He started playing his best golf ball striking wise, and he won the US Open when he made that change. We do see players vary their anchor throughout their game. Nick Price was pretty famous for doing this. He's built to be just a little bit rear of center. He drove the ball the best that way. His middle clubs, he was more centered, and his front clubs, he was more front. Now, it's okay to do that if you're a rear anchor golfer and you're trying to get more on top of it with your irons and you're trying to take power out of it, because if the biggest issue when you're doing a mismatch and you try to put power into it is you're going to break the machine. Your body's going to break down. You're going to have a lot of injuries. And if you're a rear anchor golfer and you're moving more on top of it and you take power out, you're probably not going to get hurt. And you're going to get, and again, remember, we're messy and we're adaptable as humans, so you're probably going to get some effects out of that that's going to help you flight your shorter clubs better, play the mid clubs on the trajectory you want. There are other answers, though. You can stick to the model that fits you, and you can get all that if you know how to do it. But you will see players vary it. So you can see Tiger, throughout his career, he was more rear at some point, but he's a little bit rear there on the left-hand side, centered in the middle, and he's more on top of it on the left. When he did get more on top of it, he started having body issues, by the way, because he is an aggressive player. So even though he's getting on top of it more with his shorter clubs, when he's getting aggressive, it's going to break down his body, especially when you're being aggressive. All right, so the next one that we look at is this slotting idea, this idea of slotting. And why is it, we've always been sort of told, conventionally you got to return the shaft to the shaft plane at address. But Nicklaus was above the shaft plane, Tiger's above the shaft plane. So why is it that we all have to return to the shaft plane? And why is it that there's great players in the shoulder plane, great players in the shaft plane, or great players in the middle? And I call those your hip plane slot, your torso plane slot, and your shoulder plane slot. The main reason for this is actually your core, how your core works. And so I'm an upper core person. I was a gymnast and a martial artist growing up. I did all the rings, the high bar, stuff like that in gymnastics because my coaches realized I was an upper core person and I had advantage there. You'll see Sergio Garcia's, delivers it in the hip plane slot because his lower core is a lot more engaged and active in his golf swing compared to the upper core. And Tiger's more in the middle because he's more engaged in the middle core. And there's literally a dynamic to that, like when you're growing up and you're developing those athletic skills, which core region do you tend to develop more? Well, that's going to actually come into play as well. If the one you develop dynamically doesn't match the one that you do structurally, because this is a structural influence right here, then you have what I call athletic confusion. And you get a lot of players that have a lot of time mismanaging their swings or not able to manage their swings when they mismatch it. So I think it's really important to understand structurally why one of these fits you and then use that in your golf swing. You'll have a lot more consistency. This was out of Dr. Kwan's studies, and you can see they're tracing the club functional swing plane images here. You can see that these are all on different planes here. And so, again, it exists out there, so we have to consider why and how do we get players using the best model for them. So there's different ways of figuring this out. We have multiple screens for all these things. The first one is just this forearm fold test. And you can see in this picture probably the easiest one. The gentleman on the left there, when he folds his arm up, you can see his knuckles are below his shoulder. In the middle is Kaneko, my wife. You can see she folds up. She's right in the middle. And you can see my knuckles are well above my shoulder. So this is the measurement of the upper arm to the lower arm. And if you think of it this way, when you have a really short upper arm and a real long forearm, then everything else equal, this is going to want to ride higher and further out than somebody that has a really long upper arm and a really short forearm. That will ride lower and closer. So that's a very direct influence. Everything else given the same, we're going to see there's a change there. So you can actually measure this and figure out where they need to be. And because of this arm structure, it's very natural for a golfer to build the core region, make it really strong and dynamic that matches this. Somebody who has a shorter upper arm will build a more stronger upper core. People with really long upper arms will build a stronger lower core. And we see this over and over and over again. So again, different ways of screening it. And then here's just the images of core region. This is actually out of Dr. Wright's studies. Doc Wright and I have done a lot together in the past to find out exactly what's going on with the core. Sergio, again, you can see hip plane slaughter, Tiger, torso plane slaughter, John Senden, shoulder plane slaughter. All great players. So again, they exist. We have to identify them. We have to figure out what works best for the student standing in front of us. The next one is linkage, like where do the arms match up with the body as we go through? And there's technically two different types of linkage. There's what we call delivery linkage. I just call it connection. Where are we connected at delivery? But then where do our arms have to match up with our chest coming into impact? Some people are way more forward and some people are way further back. Again, you can, if you get the presentation, you can go through those. But let's get you to, and we can screen for that again, a variety of ways. So David Duvall, you can see his arms were much further back as he rotates. His arms are closer to his rear pocket as he goes through the ball. If you look at Dustin Johnson, Dustin starts with his body leading. So he's starting down with his body leading, but what does he do? His arms catch up more with the center of his body from there, don't they? He really gets those arms and hands more forward, more in front of his chest coming in. Then if you look at Rory Sabatini, you can even see his arms are more out front to begin with, and he gets even more front coming into the ball, and that's what we call front linkage. And there's literally a structural reason for this. Can I have a volunteer come up? Anyone want to? Yeah, come on. Anyone that wants to. Oh. Good. You're good? Yeah, come on up. He'll be able to feel this. You can tell the rest of the crowd later what you felt. But just go ahead and put your grip on, just like you would normally grip it. Get all set up, ready to go. Good. Actually, come this way for me. Let's move just a little more forward. Good. Now from here, what we would do is just hinge your wrist, and then I'm going to just feel kind of it locks in right there for you. Now, right now, you can see your hands are in the center of your body, right? I'm just going to push on this, and you resist, okay? Okay? Don't have a lot of resistance there, do you? Okay? If we move it more forward, you're going to like this one a lot. It's even harder, isn't it? So in your case, if we move it right here, I'm going to push, you resist. So as soon as I started pushing, you resist, didn't you? And I'm pushing harder and harder and harder, aren't I? Yeah. This is bending more and more and more. Yeah. Like you can stand there all day. You don't have any trouble holding that, do you? No, not really. Okay, now come over here. Keep your grip on me. Just keep your grip on. Hands further out. And notice how you can't hold it as much. You're like muscling it, aren't you? It wants to go back to there. And then if it's there and I bend this, I could snap this in half, and you're just not working very hard, are you? No. So there's literally this structural alignment between where are the arms matching up, with the body. Mm-hmm. And that's where you have the most structural support. You can feel that, right? Pretty cool, huh? And so, thank you. And so what we see is when you get that linked up that way, the shaft stabilizes and the face stabilizes better. So a lot of this idea of face stabilization I've been talking about for a long time due to this linkage. And a lot of people come up with their own theories of stabilizing face and what that means, like it's got to be square to the arc. No, it doesn't. Like a plane, F-22, when it's doing a maneuver, is built to be stable as it does a maneuver. It doesn't become unstable. It's just a different type of stability. So stabilizing the shaft and the face is easiest when you learn how to link up properly for impact. So that's the first part. Any questions there? Anybody have any questions?
Have you noticed any correlation with ball striking consistency with the forward, center, or rear?
No, so actually what happens is ball position needs to change. So if we look at where that upper hub is, when you're a rear player, ball position, the window moves further back. When you're front, it actually compresses forward, and if you're center, it's more in the middle. Tiger, arguably the best iron player in the game, maybe ever, for a period of time when he was centered, and ball striking was incredible. Hogan, arguably one of the best ball strikers ever, forward. So yeah, we can go down the list of rear, center, and forward, and great ball strikers that did all of them. Everything else just has to match up. So early on in my career, I liked the idea from Claude Harmon, Sr. He said you can be an open-face player or a closed-face player. It doesn't matter. You just need to have everything else match up. Same thing here. As long as everything else matches up, it's important. And matchups is a big term now. And I think it's overused in the sense that a lot of times people say, if this, then you have to do that. There's too much of that going on. Yes, there are matchups, but be wary of saying that something has to be a matchup. Because what I've seen over the years is there's actual tendencies, all right, for like why do we have the tendencies that we have? There's a lot of research done out there, and they don't recognize the underlying tendencies that are existing in the people being studied, all right? And if you don't recognize those existing tendencies, then you don't know why things are matching up the way they're matching up in the individual. So what happens is you just see the data and you say the data says this. No, my conclusion on the data said that, because the data was just telling me what was going on based upon the tendencies that they already had and whatever other influences we gave them in the study. You see what I'm saying? So watch out for those matchups. But certainly we do see the ball position window moves back for rear anchor golfers, forward for front anchor golfers, and more center for center golfers, given everything else equal. Okay? It's a really important point always, giving everything else equal. Now we're going to get to some of the more juicy stuff. This is stuff Jim Natoli's waiting for because we've talked a lot, and these dynamic patterns really need to come out, and we need to understand them because they make a huge difference. We need to understand them better. We're always learning more and more. We'll never have all this stuff understood in one lifetime, so hopefully we can just create a great foundation in generations to come. Travis, hopefully you pick up the reins here in the future and you keep building on this information. So again, there's these three different dynamics I want to look at. The first one's this pattern of horizontals versus diagonals. And I had a theory on this many years ago and started talking to a bunch of kinesiologists and orthopedic surgeons and to see if they could help study why this is. And I believe that, I know that when we look at how our tendons and our ligaments go into their insertion points, they go in at different angles for different people. Some people go in more 90 degrees, some people go in more diagonal. My orthopedic surgeon, I had 2 operations after an accident. I actually asked him to look at it inside me when he was in there, and he did. And I'm a diagonal person in my golf swing, and sure enough, mine went in very diagonally. So we believe that that's the main reason, for this. But we can definitely see this in dynamic patterns. And so, some golfers look way more tilty, some golfers are way more horizontal. If you look at Bryson's swing now, he's way more horizontal than he used to be. Now, keep in mind that when I say horizontal, I don't mean horizontal to the ground, I mean more horizontal to your address posture. And we all tilt and turn, all right? There's another thing I said to Mac O'Grady when we had that conversation in '91. I'm a tilter, he was a horizontal golfer. If you remember back in the 80s and 90s, the older teachers here, one of the key phrases was keep your levels. Nick Faldo's favorite phrase, right? Keep your levels, right? Be very level in your turns, more horizontal. And I was a tilter, and Mac looked at my swing, he liked it, and I'm like, well, I'm built to tilt, you're built to be horizontal. But we all tilt and turn to some degree. We all have extensions. I've talked to Andy Plummer about this in the past, that even rear anchor golfers, even a horizontal rear anchor golfer, when they load rear, they turn level, and the arms start to go up, the spine goes into extension. So we all have a degree of an extension there too. You don't have to be a front anchor golfer to have that. We all do it. But you can see now that what Bryson does is much more horizontal. And what horizontal golfers do is, let's say ideally I would set you up at address, so the right shoulder is the lowest it's going to be in the golf swing. And then at impact, it would be right back at that point. And then from here, we don't add any more side bend in. I can just turn with keeping the side bend and then come out of it. And you can see Bryson really comes out of it in his golf swing now. All right? And interestingly enough, Hideki Matsuyama is built to be horizontal. And what Hideki does, everybody always says, why does Hideki let go of it? And he still stripes every one of them, right? It's like crazy, right? How many he lets go of, and they're like 15 feet. Well, Hideki's built to be horizontal. He comes in, he's got the right amount of tilts and turns right here, as he goes, he's continuing to rotate like this a lot of times. You'll see him like the right shoulder crosses the finish line and he's out here. He gets to the point where now he's stuck. His joints are stuck. And he feels it. And then he lets go of the golf club. It's so far after impact it didn't matter. But that's why he lets go of it. His joints actually get stuck. And so I call it stuck 3.0 when your joints get stuck. So when you know what window you should be in horizontally or diagonally, if you leave that window, you're putting stress on those ligaments and the tendons in your joints, and your joints start to lock up. And that's a different type of stuck. You know, stuck 1.0, tiger, right? Fire the body, arms behind, under plane. Stuck 2.0 is players that were told to keep the left arm pinned on the body. They fire the body, leave the arms behind, and they have this look. Mike Small actually developed that pattern and had to learn how to get the arms back down in front of him. And he plays a lot better when he does that. So you can see Bryson, again, very, very kind of horizontal. And we'll have a video coming up to see. Walter Hagen's the ultimate horizontal golfer, in my opinion. Original walkthrough guy, too. Gary Player was not the original walkthrough guy. Walter Hagen was. And you can see once he gets to his side bend, his right shoulder doesn't go lower, it levels, and then it comes up. And you can see that a lot of horizontal golfers will keep forward bend a lot longer too. We're all told we need to get rid of that. Well, did Walter Hagen get rid of forward bend? No. He curved the ball more than when he did this, by the way. The more he kept his forward bend and he rotated through, he curved the ball more. There is video where he actually starts the posture up and get taller sooner, and he curved the ball less when he did that. So here's Joaquin Niemann, clearly a tilter, right? Tons of side bend. This has been a big trend for a bunch of years too. Everybody's got to add all that side bend in, right? But Will Zalatoris had trouble with it. Tiger, when he did too much of it and tilted too much, had back problems. You know, so again, the machine's going to break down if you overdo it. And we see way too many young golfers these days getting hurt because they're doing patterns that they probably shouldn't be doing for them. Okay, Sam Snead, obvious tilter. Finished in posture, still holding his tilts at the end of the follow through there, isn't he? All right. Adam Scott, the neutral golfer again. We all like neutral. Neutral's pretty, but we need to do what works best for us. Okay, can we go ahead and play that video? So just so you can kind of get an idea of Bryson here. And you'll let it run a couple of times. Is it going to go? So does it look like he's really adding massive, side bend in? Is he more leveling out, especially through the ball from impact to the finish? You can really see it. So he gets into his side bend. That right shoulder did not go lower. It got higher from impact through, didn't it? Whereas a lot of the side bend golfers, the horizontal golfers, the diagonal golfers, you're going to see they even add more after impact. But he levels out more. So he gets into his side bend, and now he's trying to get out of it the rest of the way. And he could do it better. It almost looks a little violent the way he does it now. But can we go to the next one? So here's Joaquin Niemann. So clearly, he's adding more side bend and going more into tilts. Do you all see that? Is it just me seeing it, or do you guys see that? Great, thank you. All right, so there's different ways, again, of when we're doing screens to see this. We have various ways of screening it. We have this catch test that we do. There's kick tests. And again, if you want to, even holding a heavy bag, there's more ways of identifying these things. If you want to learn more about that, you can reach out to me. Again, you can get a copy of this from Scott as well, and more than happy to share it. Oops, so Now again, we can look at Bryson, like you can see his turns are more level. We all tilt and turn to some degree, but I put the level lines up so you can see it. At the top of the backswing, who has more tilt, Bryson or Joaquin Niemann? Clearly Joaquin Niemann. Like his right shoulder is way higher above that line, isn't it? Okay, again, we all create tilts and turns coming into impact, but Joaquin's got a lot more side bend than Bryson, at this point. And after impact, look what happens. Bryson's already starting to level out. Joaquin's still in massive, tilts at this point. So, and then look, we'll see like with horizontal golfers, look how high the right shoulder is above the left shoulder, in Bryson at the end of the fall through. That's something that we actually see in horizontal golfers all the time. Interesting how Tiger's actually he's on the horizontal side of middle, but he would actually finish with a high right shoulder all the time. And you'd hear on TV, oh, there's that high right shoulder, that's why he blocked it right. But when he striped it, he had a high right shoulder also. So, what was the real cause? But what you'll see is if golfers are very horizontal with their pivot as they're posturing up and the shoulders level out, and then you fall through over your left shoulder for a right-handed golfer, isn't my right shoulder going to be higher than my left? So in the fall through, we'll see that. Whereas a tilter, they're coming in, they're still in tilt, and then they fall through over the shoulder. It kind of levels them out at that point, so they look more level at this point. But if they brought their arms down, they'd still be in tilt. So we can just see that there's that influence there, and based upon how horizontal or diagonal you are, you're going to see more or less of that. What happens with mismatches? Tiger on the right, swinging really good. If you look at the creases in the shirt in the back, you see how he has a lot more creases on the left side than the right side? And that's when he was being much more tilty. A lot of stress on his back. Here's Tiger now. I think Tiger now, biomechanically, with all the screenings I do, his swing actually fits him better than it ever has. His body's broken down right now. I sure hope he gets stronger, more conditioning, and we're still able to see him play golf at a high level, because what a treat when we do get to see him play golf. But you can see now, look at there's not as many creases in the back, the shirt in the back again, because he's swinging in a way that actually fits him better. It's just one of those tells. This was Will Zalatoris doing the very, very strong side bend, lag it, stay back with the arms, rear linkage pattern. In my opinion, this is one of the big influences to hurting his back. This is him now. You can see he's much more horizontal now than he was when he was doing the massive side bend, action. Okay, before I get on the next one, any questions on that?
Did you ever find somebody whose body just isn't designed to play golf?
I had, so that is such a great question. I had.
You got front folds, forearms,
It's quite a puzzle to get them just to be decent. I have I patented a putting training aid we manufactured in Thailand, and our engineer was from Thailand, educated in the United States, but he set everything up there. Tall, gangly guy, really high shoulders and wide, and never played golf before. We went out to the golf course, and I mean, this guy looked like a praying mantis on drugs swinging a golf club. It was ugly, and he couldn't even keep score when we started. But I went there a bunch of times over a 4-year period, and he always worked on his game, and we got him to the point that he could shoot 90. It never looked good, but we got him to shoot 90. But yeah, certainly he didn't have the body built to be a really good golfer. I do see that.
Do you make adjustments away from what their body is designed to do?
So no, what I do is I go to the very basic fundamentals first, and that's dynamic skills. Aim square, return square. And I just figure out however he can aim square, return square. And then once he's got aim square, return square, and then, okay, now release it. What's a good release? So find out their natural curvature. And then, okay, how can you aim that? And then from there, what's a better way of him loading? And then stabilizing is a really important one. I think stabilization's overlooked. When we stabilize into the ground, it's power, okay? So if I stand there and I stabilize in the ground and I just swing and smash it as hard as I can without moving my body, people say, well, that's just an arm swing. Looks like just an arm swing. Kinematically, it looks like an arm swing. But I'm putting massive pressure into the ground. And so I'm using that force. So a lot of times those guys, you have to minimize the excessive motion and get them more stable and just using a really good arm swing, and then they become very, very efficient. Yeah. I think there was another question out there. Is that the only one? Somebody else I thought threw their hand up. All good? All right, so the next one we're going to talk about is swing direction. I think this is really, really important. And too many times people are trying to change people away from their natural pattern. We have swing right golfers, swing straight golfers, swing left golfers. This is not rocket science, right? But often you have a swing right golfer that hooks the ball. And what's the solution that most people give them out there? Swing left. If you can swing left, you can eliminate the hook. But what if they're built to be a swing right golfer? What if that dynamic pattern is so strong in them? What ends up happening is they get double crosses. They can't manage it. And every swing right golfer that's come to me that's told they need to swing left, when I show them they're a swing right golfer and I show them how to actually have an underdraw in their window, they never again say, I need to fade the ball. They're like, ooh, I love that draw. I can play that draw. You know? So it's like the solution is if you know what they are, figure out how to make them do that better, not try to make them do another one. So Tiger, again, look at Tiger's done a lot of things in his career. He's a swing right golfer. His putting stroke was even a couple of degrees to the right, right? And he swung right on everything. His short game was swing right, all right? And when he went to swing left, and by the way, it wasn't Foley didn't convince him to do that. Tiger told Foley he wanted to do that. You know, he thought he would play better if he could actually swing that way and fade it and control the driver better in particular. Obviously, everything else was great. And it didn't fit him. He got double crosses doing it, and he got back problems doing it. And he had chipping yips doing it. He went back to swing right golfer in his short game. What happened to his short game? Got great again, right? So we want to make sure that we understand which fits us. I do a lot of testing just with launch monitors and our simulators and stuff, and I track the patterns to see what happens. I can see when they're in a certain path window that they actually get the most club head speed and the best smash factors. All right. And then I notice where's their club face window. 4-degree path window, 2-degree face window. Where do they match up the best? And I get them to learn how to do that the best, not change it. A lot of times we'll just put the alignment 6 down just as a basic view and indication when we're on the range and we're not measuring. This is Scott McCarron. I worked with him for a bunch of years when he went 4-3-2-1 on the Champions Tour. And he loved this drill because he could see where he was swinging. And he knew that if his swing got too far in one direction or the other, that he was out of his window and it didn't work for him. He's a swing left golfer, so he'd just constantly be in that little left window there. Here's what happens with club head speed and stuff. For example, you probably can't read that. It's a little bit blurry. I'm a swing left golfer as well. I swung right on this one, 2.5 degrees, 86 mile an hour club head speed. I swung pretty much down the line on this one, 0.8 degrees left, 86.4 mile an hour club head speed. I swung 3-1 left on this one, 91.3 mile an hour club head speed. And you could say, yeah, I cherry picked these, but I can tell you I've been watching this for 20-something years. This is what I do. I create more club head speed when I swing left. It's just what I do. And I can go into the details of how that developed in me and everything if anybody wants to talk about that. But there were tendencies from natural, like we're told grip it this way when we're young, but I'm an under golfer and now my grip's on top of where my under golf would be. And if your grip's on top of where your your neutral would be, it's going to encourage you to go more left. So that was the basic thing that made me a swing left golfer. And because I developed all my power moves off that grip and that happening, I created the most speed that way. I lose with my driver 5 to 6 mile an hour club head speed when I swing to the right. And that's just off average. And I can't get it anywhere near my top club head speed when I'm swinging right. Bryson, if you look at him, he rehearses a lot, swinging out to the right. He's a swing right golfer. Henrik Stenson's much more down the line, and you'll see a tendency for down the line golfers when they swing down the line to have their arms much more in front of them. George Knudson, Mo Norman, even Nicholas and Greg Norman. You'll notice when they exited a lot, their arms were more here. They weren't exiting left over there. They were exiting more in front, and both of those golfers swung more down the line, I would say as well. Again, it's a continuum and a window. By the way, like swing right golfers in general, The shorter the club is, the more they swing to the right. The longer the club is, the more they tend to swing down the line. I'd say that's about 75% of swing right golfers, and swing left golfers are the opposite. But we do see some swing right golfers who, the longer the club is, the more right they swing. And again, I don't change that. What I do is I understand what their path window is, and then I get them to match the face to that path window. I can tell them, just send it where you're swinging. And they say, but the target's over here. I go, no, it isn't. It's over there. If you're standing here and you swing over there, there's where it goes. Like, what did Lee Trevino do, right? He had a reference line. I don't like the zero line in the system and calling it the zero line. It's just a reference line. He set up to the reference line. In his mind, he tried to swing down the reference line. But when he tried to swing down the reference line, where did he actually swing? To the right. And then what did he do? You can't talk to hooks. So he managed face to that path to play his push fade, didn't he? And that's just what he developed. He did a pretty good job of managing that over the years, didn't he? But we're all told to change it when we do stuff like that. So I like to know where their path window is, throughout their bag, learn to manage face to path. The better you can be at managing face square to path, near square to path, the less the ball is going to curve for them. And now it's just, that's where it starts based upon where I'm standing. So I do like drills on the range. I just have them stand without even looking out there and know where their reference line is visually in relation to them. Make their swing in relation to their reference line. Then look up and see where the ball's going. And when they make good swings, the ball's always going away from them the same direction. If I just have them randomly aim somewhere else, they swing, they look up, the ball's going away from them in the same direction. They learn what their windows are. And now they can just align things to get their window at the target. Does that make sense? So here's me. This is actually right around the time I talked to Mac. Shoulder planer, very tilty, very exiting left. He'd never seen anybody exiting this far left. He's like, wow, that's amazing. And that's what I called it back then, exiting left. By the way, exiting left and swinging left in my book are two different things. You can be a swing left golfer and exit in front, as a matter of fact. So might be one of those forget the insect I told it. But one of those guys that Chuck was asking about. But you can see very tilty, very swing left. And that was just my swing back then. So the next one is athletic sequence. By the way, any questions on that? Yep.
Do you ever see like the window change based on what club?
Yeah, so certainly there are very few people who the window is the same for all clubs. That's the anomaly. I see it, but that's an anomaly. Okay, so typically, like people come to me all the time. They get set up parallel to zero line. They got an 8-iron in their hand, and they're 8 degrees to the right, and they're like, "Oh my God, that's massively right." I'm like, "Really?" I'm like, keep swinging. It turns out they swing 4 to 8. So 8 is a big right for them for that club, but it's within their 4-degree window. You see what I'm saying? And typically, like that's a very common number I'll see. For a 9-iron or an 8-iron, 4 to 8 degrees to the right, their window. And even like we're messy again. One week that player I might see him 3 to 7. Another week I might see him 5 to 9. But there's this window, and I never see them outside 3 and 9. They were just always within that 6-degree window over time. And at any given time, they're managing a 4-degree window. By the way, the really good players manage about a 2-degree window on their path. But it's different for different clubs. And aren't we all told that the shorter the club is, the less you should curve it? I mean, how many times have we heard that in the game? I don't see that with launch runners and TrackMans. Like when I do with some players, but with swing right golfers in particular, that golfer who's got, a average 6-degree right path with a 9-iron, and in his mind needs to get the ball back on the zero line, he's curving that 9-iron to get it back to the zero line, isn't he? And that same golfer may have a 1-degree average path to the right with a driver. And if he's trying to get that back to the zero line, it would curve less, wouldn't it? Interesting, right? So ultimately, I don't like my golfers curving it a lot in particular. There are some that they play this draw and this thing curves 18 feet. And I'm like, man, that's a lot of curve, I'm thinking in my mind, right? And I'm like, how'd you like that? Don't ever say to them out loud, that's a lot of curve, right? Ask them what they like first, right? So how do you like? Oh, I love that. I really love that curve. That's my favorite draw right there. And I'm thinking, damn, that's a lot of curve, right? And so there are some, Kenny Perry, who curves the ball more than Kenny Perry? Well, Dustin used to, Johnson, DJ used to do it when he drew the ball, but he turned his into a push fade, started playing some great golf, didn't he? And so, yeah, I see that move. Once we identify what they do best, we stay in those windows. Typically, the shorter the club is, the more right the path window, the longer it is, the more left the path window for the swing right golf, for example. And we do have some that are the opposite. As a matter of fact, I said there was that player who's front and front from Northern California. I coach him and his brother. His brother, the longer the club goes, the more right it goes. So he's got to set up more open as the clubs get longer to play it closer to the target. And I get a lot of players who end up actually managing face the path so well that they actually have a 1 degree open to 1 degree closed club face window. And they just don't care if it drops left or right. They pick a window, here's your field goal, they pick the center of the field goal, and they let it drop either way, and they don't care, and they play great golf that way. Drives their college coaches nuts. The college coaches always tell me, you got to move it one way. And it's like, Coach, I just don't see it that way, and I just don't work on it that way. I like the middle of the window. So, but I have a lot of players that end up playing that way. They just don't curve it much. I think Jason Bone on tour didn't curve it much. He saw, and in his mind, he saw everything as straight, whether it fell this way or that way. I think he was the player that said he always saw it straight. But there are players out there that do that. Any other questions? Nope. Okay. So this is athletic sequence. This one's like really, really important. This is where stabilization comes into play. We're all told that we need to fire the body, lead with the body. That's how we're going to get power. David Duvall, Dustin Johnson. But Jimmy Walker goes up to the top, stabilizes in the ground, whips it through. Plays pretty good, pretty powerful player too, right, Jim? And Jake Knapp, anybody seen him lately? What does he do? He's kind of, people are saying he buggy whips it, right? Stabilizes into the ground, whips it through, and then his body falls to the finish. He's really long, 190 mile an hour ball speed, a lot out there. So why is it that, again, we all have to do it the same way? So here's David Duvall, obviously, again, leading with the body through. That's what I call athletic sequence 1. By the way, those players load in the trail side. They're driving off that trail side until they can get stable enough on the lead side that they can actually deliver everything off that stable lead side. That's how they do it. Some players stabilize into both legs. Sam Snead, right? His old squat move. He was stabilizing in the both legs, this scissor kick move out of both legs. And that's a more centered model, but that was his way of doing it. Justin Thomas, you can see here. Can you see he's flexing, like from the top? I already talked about early extension and how do you get rid of it. You don't have to get rid of early extension. All you have to do is get people to flex in the transition really well, torque into the ground. Now they've got the proper flexion, they'll never early extend. So it's not about getting rid of early extension. It's about improving flexion and actually how you stabilize back into the platform. You do those two things, you can't early extend. And then what does Justin do from there? Then he explodes through the ball, doesn't he? He's not really firing from the top. He's getting into the ground, stabilizing, then he explodes. Here's Jake Knapp again. So even though he opens up, is he really whipping his hips through to try to get power? Or is he just opening as he stabilizes and then he whips it through? If you watch his swing in motion, that's really what he does. Understanding this is really important. It's very easy to screen for as well, because if you try to get a player to do the opposite of what they're built to do here, you are going to hurt them and they're going to spray the ball all over the place. I guarantee it. So just like stabilizing the body into the ground helps stabilize the shaft in the face as well, just like getting linked up helps stabilize the shaft in the face as well. If you're linked up and you've got the proper athletic sequence for you, you're stabilizing the shaft in the face really good, and you're not going to spray the ball as much. All right, so any questions there? All right, so now the last part here, I want to get into 3 intergame influences. I think like every lesson I give intergame lessons in. And so, like most professionals, I played in college. I wanted to be a tour player. And so I met a gentleman named Fred Shoemaker. Some of you may have heard of him, from California. I grew up in Northern California. And so he has a book called Extraordinary Golf and Extraordinary Putting. But he started with the inner game of golf. And so Timothy Galloway wrote the Inner Game of Golf. They did inner game schools. So one day Fred said to me, and he was the only coach I ever had. I never had a swing coach. I'm self-taught. All the biomechanical stuff and swing mechanic stuff I studied on my own. But he was my mentor, and I met him my second year in college, I think it was. And so anyway, he gives me a call one day, says, you got to come to this inner game school. And I said, great. So I'm like, when is it? Where is it? Show up down there. We get there, and they're doing the whole introduction, and then they start dividing everybody in the audience into groups of 4, and I'm left out. I'm just sitting there by myself. And they start naming the coaches for all the groups, and they get to the last group, and Fred's like, and EA is your coach. And I'm like, what? And he kind of goes like this to me. They send everybody out to warm up. He comes up to me. He says, look, you know these drills as good as anybody. Just run them through the drills, and things will be great. And it went really well. And I asked him later on, I said, why did you do that, by the way? This was a couple years later. He says, look, I just figured if your playing career does not work out for you, I figured you'd be a really good coach someday. That's why I became a coach. It's all because of Fred. I might end up in engineering or something if I didn't end up playing professional golf if he hadn't pushed me in that direction. And he's been a great mentor to me over the years, and I really appreciate everything he's done for me. And so in the inner game, awareness is a really big thing. If you haven't studied the Inner Game of Golf, I suggest you go read it. It's still a great book. There's a lot of really good information in there. Awareness is really important, and awareness is important to truly knowing something. And truly knowing something is important to having the confidence to do things, especially under pressure. So like Fred always said to me, he says, it's more important to know where the club face is during the swing. We'd literally do a drill. My eyes were closed. I would swing. He'd say stop. I'd have to tell him where the club face was facing. And he says, more important to know where the club face is facing than it is to know where you think it should be. Because if you know where it is, when you make good swings, you'll know why. If you know where it is and you make bad swings, you'll know why. That awareness is very, very powerful. So being aware of what you're doing is really, really important. And most people are more in their minds, right? They're thinking too much. And I'm always having to remind my students, that was a thinking mode swing. That wasn't a feel mode swing. I want you to get the feel and swing for the feel. It makes it more reactive and responsive. To me, golf is a reaction game. In tennis, we always say, well, golf's not a reaction game because the ball's not moving. But in tennis, do you only react to the ball moving, or do you react to the rules? I can only allow it to bounce once. I got to serve it in this box. I got to return it in that box, There's a lot of things and situations that we know of in tennis that we react to besides the moving ball. So we create those images that we respond to, but we just create them really ready to hand, in a fluid manner. And we want to play golf that way. We have more downtime in golf. But in our routine, we want to get ourselves into a mode of imagery and programming an image that we can respond to and not have to think our way through things. One of the next things I'm going to talk about, onboarding the subconscious mind. This is really, really important because if your meeting of the minds is not there, if your subconscious mind and your conscious mind are not on the same page, there's conflict in the mind, there's going to be struggle, you're going to have a hard time performing. And the last part of it is pouring on the value. And learning to pour on the value is a really, really important thing. And so if you look at adults when they learn, right? Adults play a golf shot, they miss it, and they're like, what I do wrong there? What went wrong? How do I fix that? They pour all the energy into the negative, right? What do kids do? They top it, they miss it, give me another. Yeah? Hook it, oh, give me another. Stripe it, wow, look at that. Dad, did you see that? They pour the value on, they remember that. So my dad took me to the range when I was 9 years old. I remember one shot. I don't remember any of the misses or other good ones, but I remember this one shot. It came off exactly the way I imagined it. It went right over the yardage marker I was looking at. I'm sure I did the dad, did you see that? Look at that thing. I'm sure I did it. In that moment, I wanted to be a golf professional. You can see how much that moment and the value I put on that moment directed my life. That value that we put on things allows us to access memories and information, so that we can utilize it in a more ready manner. When I was 13 years old, we were playing at a golf course. I blocked, first hole, par 5, blocked my shot off to the right into the trees. We get up in there. My dad's like, look, you can just punch it out through there. You can still get your third one on the green. You'll make par. You may even make birdie. And I'm looking through the trees, and there's this hole up there, and I think I'm Sevy, right? And I'm like, Dad, I can get it through there. I can get it right up there in front of the green. No, just go ahead and punch it. Well, finally, he lets me play this shot. And I stripe it right through the hole on the front of the green, 2-putt it for birdie. And so a few years ago, sorry, my dad just passed away. A few years ago, we were talking, and my dad said to me, you know what amazed me about your golf game? It wasn't that how long you played it or your scores. He was like, you could always get out of trouble. And I said to him, Pops, you remember when I was 13 years old and we were playing Aptos and we were up in the trees, and you let me play that shot through the hole in the trees, and I knocked that on the green? I said, I have drawn on that my whole life. And I used to tell him after that, Pops, trees are 90% air because of the confidence that I developed from that. He laughed. I go, why are you laughing? He goes, honestly, I was trying to teach you a lesson. I figured you'd rattle around in the trees, have to punch it out. And I said, well, I really appreciate you letting me take that shot. He goes, yeah, that's probably the best mistake I've ever made in my life. So, when we pour value on things, it lets us access those things a lot better. So you've all heard about like myelination and how myelination works. When you use the value system really well, pouring on the value on things, it helps myelinate those neurological pathways to go get that information and those skills and use them when you want to use it. All right? And so I'm going to jump to the last part right now. By the way, this is all written stuff after this, so you can get that. So I prefer that you just understand the story. So when we look at developing skills and accessing skills, there's 3 things that go into that. Tiger always said, I need more reps, didn't he? Need more reps, I need more reps. But the talent code said you need 10,000 hours to master something. That's time. So there's reps and time influences going into things. To me, the third influence is this value. How do you pour value on? So my college team coach, my senior year, told me, one day he said to me, he goes, it's amazing. I don't understand how you do it, but it's never taking you more than 2 days to make a change and get it in play in tournaments. One thing took me a week. But he was right. I made those changes really fast. And he says, well, how do you do that? And I said, well, number one, I play 1,500 balls a day on the driving range. So I got a lot of reps in. Different things, not just doing one thing, but I get a lot of reps in. I did 2 to 3 hours of drills at home every night. All right? So say 5 hours of drills, and 3,000 balls. Really not enough reps and time to get that completely internalized. But what I was able to do is pour on the value. I could take the value and up it 1,000%. All right? So there's this sum total of reps, time, and value that you put into the operation of this. Really hard to get 1,000 times reps in, isn't it? Really hard to get 1,000 times time in. But if you put your mind to it, you can put 1,000 times value into it. And if you look at Jack Nicklaus, he would always say he'd practice on the range till he had it. And then he wouldn't stand there and try to beat it into himself. He'd go away. He'd go do something else. And somewhere that day, he would just get his mind on what he was doing. And he would really, that was his way of putting value on it. There's different ways of putting value on things. Breck kind of asked this yesterday. We were talking about this. There's different ways of putting value. For him, it might have been just cementing it in his mind. For the little kid, it's, Dad, did you see that? And maybe looking for affection and acknowledgement. We have to find the way that works for the individual to put the value on it. So I find that my students that learn to do this learn really, really fast. They make the changes. And what happens a lot of times is that, you can actually, what I call onboarding the subconscious mind there, the subconscious mind has to accept that what you're doing now or what you're intending to do is better than the old habits. If it doesn't accept it, it's going to continue to override your intention in the moment because you're going to be standing there and you're not completely, how often you are 100% focused on the new intention? How often? I mean, probably a small percentage of the time, all right? So if you're not fully committed to that new intention, there's enough leftover room there that the subconscious mind is going to say, but aren't we supposed to do this? And it goes and grabs it, all right? So it's what I call leftovers. I tell my students all the time, there's these leftovers. If you're not fully committed, your subconscious mind's going to grab that. So until we get the subconscious mind fully on board, accepting the new intention, it's going to grab that old stuff. All right? And the other stuff, as you're learning, you're sitting there practicing, right? Your subconscious mind will say to you, like, have you ever done a drill where you do like one thing on one shot, one thing on another, and a third thing on the third shot? And you can get that one thing in there, but the other two things aren't in there as you're going through that variable practice. Well, you're standing there with the one intention, and you want the whole package, because I get it now. Students say this all the time, I know what I need to do. Why can't I do it every time? Because the acceptance isn't there. And so the subconscious mind, in the middle of you going for the one new move, okay, it says, okay, I'll give you that, but you got to give me some of this old habit over here, and it throws that in there. And that's why you don't get all three all the time. And it takes time and reps and value to get that whole thing accepted in the subconscious mind so that you can do these things in a very ready-to-hand manner. Does that make sense? And so how often have you been standing there, you're standing over a shot, you know what your intention is, you know you can do it, but you feel a little bit of doubt, confusion in the mind. It's because at that moment the subconscious mind's not fully on board. And too often what people will do is they'll work on something for a long time, and then, so I had a student who, he never won a tournament, never was in the final group. After, a couple years of working with him, he seems to be in the final group every tournament he's playing in. But it falls apart on the back nine Sunday. And he said, my swing fell apart. I'm like, dude, your swing didn't fall apart. Your swing got you there. What you're doing is getting you there more often than you've ever been there. But on the back nine, you start thinking about other things. You're concerned about the result, the outcome, are you going to win, all this other stuff. And now your subconscious mind's not on board with the same thing. It took him 7 years before he actually accepted the fact that he needed to change his process, not his golf swing. And then he started winning golf tournaments. And then he said to me, I wasted 7 years. You were right. I wasted 7 years thinking it was my golf swing, keep trying to tweak my golf swing, when all I had to do was have more commitment on the back nine on Sunday. And so people change systems all the time because they haven't gone through the process of first learning what the skill really is, what it feels like, how to do it. And then number two, they don't get it accepted to the level on the subconscious mind the way it needs to. So it's not showing up as often as they think it should. And then they blame the system. I need to go try another model, another swing model, because this one's not working. No, it's not that that model wasn't working. Like, they know it really works. So I have a student recently who is a good player, member at the club, and decided he was going to commit this offseason to really making swing changes. We got him mate, was playing the best golf he's ever played, went on a trip to Palm Springs, played great golf, went on a trip, Florida, played great golf, came back, worked on some things, went to Jamaica with 12 friends, and they bet and do all this, and came back, he's like, it was horrible. I'm like, well, what happened? What changed? Because you were playing great. Yeah, I was playing the best golf of my life. I'm like, well, what was different down there? Nothing. I'm like, wait, something was different. And he goes, well, to tell you the truth, on the third hole, on the first round, the first day, I missed a shot, and my mind just went off, and I'm like, I felt like I didn't know how to hold the club or do anything. I couldn't swing. I couldn't do any of this stuff. I'm like, well, your mind's in a different place. That had nothing to do with your golf swing. He's like, yeah. And then he told me, to be honest, this has happened since I was in elementary school playing junior golf in tournaments. And I never knew that this was something that he'd been through. And I'm like, well, you have to change that, reframe your mindset to begin with. The first step is you got to reframe your mindset. I go, it's absolutely possible that the next swing that you're going to make right now will be the best swing that you've ever made in your life. He says, I can't see that. I said, if you can't see that, you can't reframe that, you'll never get through this. And it took me a little bit, but I had to convince him that this next swing could be the best swing of his life. And by the way, he'd already warmed up, and it was ugly. Like, I'm watching it thinking, what the heck happened to him? Because before he went to Jamaica, that was great. And he stands up there, and he just pipes it. He says, I didn't make one of those in Jamaica, not one. I said, but you finally believed that this next swing could be a great swing. And what you did is you shut down the confusion in your mind. You reframe things into an open mindset that now allowed you to imagine and access the process that we've been working on, and you had some belief in that process, and you executed that swing while in that belief. So learning to get the awareness, know what works for you, get your subconscious mind on the same page, learning to pour the value on to support all that, helps you build a process that you can depend upon. And hey, golf is hard, life is hard. Doesn't mean you're going to do it all the time. But at least now you have a process you can get back to. I wish I had a whole hour just on this because we could have talked a lot more about it. But I got 11 seconds left, so thank you all. I don't know if anybody has a quick question. We're all good? All right, thank you very much.